Hello, and welcome to the BFI London Film Festival 2020 and this online panel discussion about the female horror renaissance. Since 2014, a year where there were several breakout horror hits, including A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which also screened at LFF, and The Babadook, there has been a very notable turning point in how we talk about women and horror and the efforts made by writers, academics, programmers, filmmakers on drawing out the historical contributions of female creatives and women to the genre. So that's one way of putting that. We're living in a moment of female horror renaissance, both in the filmmaking and the critical space. My name is Anna Bogutskaya. I'm a writer and a programmer and the co-founder of the Final Girls, and I'm very excited to be hosting this conversation with filmmakers Prano Bailey-Bond, Jennifer Sheridan, and Jennifer Hamdorf. And welcome, everyone. How are you doing
Hi.
today?
Good,
Great.
thank you. Thanks for having us.
I'm really excited to dig in. I think we'll have a lot to chat about, and I'm a big fan of your work individually. So to kick off, can you all talk a little bit about your own relationship with horror cinema and horror culture?
Well, my relationship, I've always been a massive horror fan since I was a kid, and my mum would kind of see the films that I was watching and question why I was interested in this kind of thing. But I've always been drawn to sort of dark psychology, I guess, and the films that the first films that I really got into, the first bits of cinema were very much like David Lynch. And I think that, things like Lost Highway and Fire Walk With Me, I kind of think that was and Twin Peaks were like, for me, my introduction to horror and the world of weird cinema. And that was just super thrilling and exciting for me. And I kind of wanted to work in that space. And so I've been making, horror films or genre film, I suppose, since kind of my late teens. And I definitely feel like there was a long time where both being a female filmmaker and a horror filmmaker were not necessarily the most popular things to be. Mm-hmm. So that felt like quite a big mountain to climb. And then there was a shift, I think, a shift in thinking both about horror and about female filmmakers at the same time, that suddenly made horror the thing that the industry wants to make, and female filmmakers the thing that the industry wants to make films with. And I'm both of those things. And I have felt that in terms of my own work and being able to push that forwards. So I guess my relationship with horror itself has always been a very exciting, positive, thrilling relationship, both as a filmmaker and an audience member. But, in terms of my relationship with working in horror and working in film, I do feel like there's been a surge, in interest in the last few years, which is very, very exciting. It's a really exciting space to be in now.
It's a really good point for me to jump off of, if I may, because when we talk about, and I'll do a quick version of my background as well, but when we talk about the female renaissance in horror, I don't at all think it's the audience's taste or the filmmaker's taste that has changed, but it's the gatekeepers' acceptance of, exactly as you said, first horror filmmakers and then female filmmakers. My background has always been from the making side and the finding ways to make side of film. I started with trauma as a reference for me making films as a kid, where heck, if that's what it can look like, then I can make that. And eventually, meeting Lloyd Kaufman and being introduced to some British filmmakers by him. And from there, it just became about getting things made, however I could possibly get them made. And genre film has always been easier to get made on independent budgets. It's always been acceptable in that sort of lower budget bracket. But lately, when we have seen bigger names and theatrical attachments like the Blumhouse films, which has been a huge gatekeeper both for horror films in general, people of color and women. Blumhouse, after having really screwed the pooch and said that there are no female filmmakers out there a couple of years ago, his studio tends to be the place that shows we can be profitable. But yeah, it is this weird shift where all of a sudden, not only are we allowed to pitch female filmmakers, but if you don't have a female filmmaker, your project is seen as not on the cutting edge. So that's where the paradigm has shifted, I think. And what does that seem like for you, Jennifer?
Well, I mean, my background with horror is basically that I've always loved being scared and but I also equally loved being made to laugh. So my kind of favorite horrors were things that kind of did a bit of both, like Gremlins and stuff like that. But I think, like you said, it's interesting that it's easier to make a film in a low budget way when it's genre. But I think for me, it's just, I get excited by stories and stories with light and shade. And as long as they have those things and they can kind of take you to a dark place, but then maybe bring you to a light place, then I'm excited. I'm just excited to be involved.
And I wanted to pick up on something that Jen and Prana, you both kind of mentioned, which is the shift in the gatekeepers approach to horror, but especially to female creatives. And I'd love for you all to kind of chip in on your experiences in getting your films made. Is how, at what point kind of have you noticed that there's been an openness that's come around from commissioners, from executives, from funders, from studios about it might not seem novel to us, of this idea of female filmmakers being interested in making genre films and pitching them and wanting to make these stories?
I think it's been really gradual. I don't think, because when I've been making the first feature I made was with a female director in 2009, and I didn't work with another one for a decade. And the reason for that, I was really super ashamed of myself as well when I suddenly realized that I hadn't been working with them. It really shocked me. But the reason for that was that frequently I would be approached by directors with a project that already had some element of finance or production in place, and then I would complete it. And the first time that happened to me, after the very first film I made in 2009, was with Alice Lowe and Prevenge. And that film was made both because of and in spite of her being a woman who was pregnant, because she was worried she wouldn't get any work for the next couple of years. And so she said, well, I'm autonomous for about the next 6 to 8 weeks, because she was 6 months pregnant when she phoned me. She said, this company has said they'll give me 60 grand to go shoot a feature. I think, I know I'm going to be in it. I know it's a pregnant woman who's killing people. Can we do that? Can we get a film made in the next 30 days? And I said yes, because to be perfectly frank, it hadn't dawned on me how absolutely terrifying it would be to have a pregnant woman who was going to give birth in 6 weeks on set working for 12-hour days, jumping through doggy doors and freaking the hell out of me. And it wasn't until the baby was born with, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a lovely little smile that I felt vindicated. But it was a bizarre experience, because it's not like they gave her £1 million. They gave her 60 grand. Which is nothing. Let's be honest. It's not a budget for a film. It's pocket change for an experiment, right? And then after that, suddenly we were on panels about the female horror film renaissance, and that was somebody's going to have to help me. What about
2016?
Yeah, there you go. 4 or 5 years ago, and from there, I don't know if we changed anything. I haven't seen another film be directed by a pregnant woman. I am excited that we've ticked that box, so we've shown it can be done. But what I have noticed is, at least in the instances of contests and festivals, it has almost become an obligation for women to become included, or have a spotlight in some way. And that because of that, the access is increasing. I'm very much still having conversations with people that I would never have with a male director about viability, about how they can deal with crew, about what prep they're going to be doing. There's a lot more looking over shoulders with female filmmakers, I found, than with male filmmakers. They want to see shot lists, they want to see storyboards within a timeline as well. And that said, I've worked with a lot of male filmmakers who never provided those, and I have never had it requested by the exec on that end. So, you know, is it getting easier? Yes. Has a switch gone off? No. Do we need to keep calling it a renaissance? Hopefully soon enough it'll just be a balanced playing field. But yeah, it's a changing landscape, but I hope that change continues, because there's still a long way for it to go.
That's so interesting that you say that, because as a female director making a horror film, that wasn't my experience at all. Like I wasn't asked for a shot list or anything. It was just like, here's the money, we trust you, go make the film, and like had complete creative freedom, basically. It was like incredible to be trusted like that. But yeah, it's interesting to hear that that is your experience.
Well, and this is at pre-finance stage as well. It's in order to be able to accept these women I've put forward as first-time filmmakers, they wanted to see way more than I ever had execs who wanted to see. So it's interesting. Was that your first, like, were they your first home for the film? Like, was it love at first sight, or was there a lot of different places you guys looked for?
I think it's actually the same company that gave Alice. Is it Great Point Media?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were who gave me a huge chunk of change. Well, not a huge chunk of change in film terms, but more than what Alice got, for sure. Yeah, my agent had a relationship with them, so they had a bit of a shorthand there. They read the script, they loved it, and they were just like, yeah, just go do it.
And Prano, to bring you into the conversation a bit more, you'd done already a number of genre shorts before embarking on Censor, your first feature. Did you notice a shift in support from the industry, from when you were making your short film work to pitching Censor?
Yeah, because I think I made one short called Shortcut, which was with Film 4, but most of my other shorts were independent. So definitely then moving into making my first feature with Film 4, the BFI and Film Wales, was a lot more support than I've had on my shorts, for sure. But in terms of like because I feel like throughout my shorts I've been, we've been kind of profiled in articles about female filmmakers working in horror, and that's kind of been a conversation that's been going on for a number of years. But for me, I think the moment that I felt like, oh, the industry's shifting, was when I was in a meeting with a producer, and I was like, how come you want to meet with me? Like, you don't make horror. And they were like, but there's so much exciting horror being made now. And so we've just become a lot more open to horror. And I felt like I was going, you get these general meetings booked in by your agent. And I was going from like meeting to meeting with companies that I just thought, some of them, you've seen their work. They feel like they fit with you. But then so many that feel like they've become so much more open-minded, particularly since something like Get Out, which I think was just such a massive hit. It's kind of opened, I think it's opened up the way that producers and financiers see it, because of the cinema experience of watching a horror film that's really, really good. It's like a thrilling physical experience, and that's why Get Out was such a big pinpoint film, because when I saw it at the BFI and NFT1, packed. And in fact, I wonder if you introduced it, Anna. I think you might have done.
I programmed that screening and I remember it very well. I was there as well.
Everyone was shouting at the screen. It was amazing. It was like, this is how cinema should be. And you don't get that kind of experience from other genres. And I think that now that we've got VOD and people can stay at home and watch a film, you're kind of looking for a cinema experience that's going to give you a roller coaster ride. And that is what horror can do. And so many horror films are doing that, you know, and really successfully at the moment. And so it would be stupid for the industry not to recognize that and not to be kind of opening their arms, you know, to horror filmmakers and female filmmakers off the back of films like The Babadook and Raw, you know, and A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which all kind of definitely felt like, not only as a filmmaker trying to get my films funded, but also just from a personal point of view. Like when I first saw Raw, at the end of the film, I actually was choking back tears because I was so moved by watching a female coming of age story that was a body horror. And I know we've had, you know, ginger snaps and teeth, but this was different because it felt kind of real. It felt like an experience I hadn't had, that was directed by this woman who came out, and she was like so young and cool and intelligent. And I watched this Q&A and I was just like, we can do this. And she's demonstrating that we can do this. And that just felt like really refreshing, basically. It felt like there was a sense of kind of freedom moving forwards. And I do think that that's shifted, and it's a shame. You know, you need trailblazers in terms of financiers. You need people who are going to finance films like Raw without seeing Raw work already. And that, I guess, is where there's a bit of a block sometimes.
This is exactly, I think you've hit the point about things having to go before and seeking permission and this kind of thing. I think when we talk about, you know, progression, we are past the place where young women think they aren't allowed to direct horror films anymore, which is something that I certainly experienced. It sounds a bit, you know, to various extents, we may have experienced that in our lives. I absolutely didn't think I was allowed. And it took people asking me to do it to feel like I was actually accepted and could be doing that, rather than making silly dramas. So we're past that point, I feel, but now we need to get that culmination where there's enough young women experimenting and playing and developing their skills, that when they reach their 20s and you know, working age, that there's just too many of them to ignore. So it's I do think that, you know, it's great that permission seeking doesn't feel like it's a requirement anymore. I think maybe those of us looking for budgets still feel like it's there very much to some extent. But
that's the thing for me. I never didn't feel like I could do it myself. It was the gatekeeper aspect.
Yeah, there you go.
It was the seeing it being done by a woman and being in the cinema and seeing audiences respond to it. I was already making horror. I started making horror in my late teens, and I never ever felt like I'm not allowed to do this. I never even thought about the fact that I was a woman until I was asked to talk on a panel about a book about female filmmakers, female directors. And I opened this book and I was like, wow, I've never read a book about female directors. It only dawned on me at that point that all my kind of, the people I looked up to, the books that I read, they were all men, and it didn't click, you know. So I definitely don't feel like I needed the permission. I just think it's like, it's being trusted. I think that's the thing. It's being kind of trusted by people who are putting a lot of money into something, and if you don't fit the kind of image of what a director usually looks like, which is often like an older grey-haired man, white, then, you know, people aren't completely sure, and we're seeing more and more examples of people who look a little bit different directing films, and I think that's what we need. Yeah.
There's something that I wanted to pick up on that you both, Jen and Prana, you mentioned, which is kind of there's the seeking permission stage seems to be over. It's been validated over and over again that there's audiences, and that those audiences, not just women and young girls as well, for female-made horror. Everybody can enjoy it, but there is something as well. There's the gatekeepers who have sort of started awakening in the last couple of years. But I wonder if you could comment on the kind of extra layer of gatekeeping that exists, because the horror circuit and the horror industry, the horror specific producers or the horror specialized production companies that are there, but then there's the other layer of sort of the main, I'm going to call them mainstream, but please take this as very much in air quotes, kind of the mainstream or the art house production companies, producers, the sort of the approved layer of cinema of this is the people who get awards, these are the type of films that get awards considerations, award campaigns, these are the type of films that get big budgets associated with them and get big stars attached. What has been your experience, and what are your thoughts kind of on perhaps those gatekeepers starting to let horror filmmakers, and particularly there was something that you mentioned before, kind of if you don't have a woman attached to make horror, you were sort of not cutting edge anymore. So what do you think about that now, perhaps, or in the last couple of years, being a sort of a trend for more mainstream industry companies?
I think it comes down to risk. And on the critical side, which is sort of what Prana was saying with trust, trust is the inverse of risk, I guess, is that on the critical side, it doesn't cost them anything to let them in, right? It doesn't cost them anything to open the door and to take a chance. And more often than not, because it's all based on taste and there's a finished product there, something to judge and look at, it's easy to make those judgments. So, you see festivals like Frontiers being very supportive. You see even Fantastic Fest with its troubled past, making an effort, making a visible effort. I have been on a similar panel at Fright Fest, like at least there's a desire to, even if it's a desire to be seen, having those conversations, you have to have people to be seen with. So I don't think it's difficult. I think it's great on the critical side, and there's a lot of support on the festival and critical and governmental side. I think when you're asking people for money up front, it's exactly what Prana was saying, where there's still a hesitancy to trust people they don't recognize as looking like what they think of as directors. And whether that's their background or their body of work. And I'm speaking as well from a US perspective, as well as a working in the UK perspective. I have had hideous conversations in the last 5 years with people about who would be an acceptable director or not. And it was based on skin tone and gender and this, that, and the other. And those conversations still happen for sure. I think no one can risk being seen to have those conversations anymore. And so because of that, they're much quieter conversations, and hopefully they're becoming less and less amplified because of that. And again, we'll see this erosion of that behavior moving forward. I think it's good that everyone has to put their best face forward best face facing forward now. But I do hope it's not a trend. I hope that as soon as the eye goes off gender balance, that we're not just going to see things going back to exactly the way they were. And that's my doomsday. I didn't have my happy coffee this morning.
Jennifer, would you like to comment on your experience so far?
I mean, it's difficult because I feel so lucky in so many ways, and I made a lot of short films. I've made like 13 short films, which is a lot before I did my first feature. But all of that was like a growing process. I tried lots of different genres like sci-fi and drama and ghost stories, and like trying to figure out what my voice was. And then made a film that's nothing like any of those shorts at all. So, but I feel like, apart from the fact that maybe I've made a lot more shorts than some male directors who have been given an opportunity to direct a feature, apart from that, I don't feel like I've been held back. But then obviously I've not been in those rooms where the conversations happen like Jen is talking about. I've never been in those rooms. So if I haven't got a job or an opportunity, I don't know if it's because I wasn't right for the job or because they didn't want to risk giving it to a female. I just don't know.
Well,
but like,
and I'm not sure it's a conscious bias, I would say as well. Like sometimes the things you hear people saying are certainly code words. Like stamina, or energy, or control. Can she control the crew? And it's not, so it's not always, ooh, these ovaries, but like, but just you two ladies who are brilliant filmmakers, case in point, you've both made a multitude of very successful, very well done short films. I'm trying to think if any of my male directors made more than one short film before we made a feature, and I don't think they did.
But it was my choice when I decided to push forward in my feature. I remember very specifically, I remember people saying, oh, how come you haven't made a feature yet? And I just wanted to be ready. That was what I felt, it was.
Isn't that interesting as well, though?
It is interesting, but you can analyze that in many ways in terms, I don't feel like I'm not confident as a person, as a director, as a filmmaker. I feel like maybe there was something more measured in me in terms of wanting to also do the best possible job when I got the opportunity. And I'm glad I waited. I'm glad that I got to make the film that I did with the people I got to make it with at that time. I think that it's been the right step for me. And obviously when it comes to like the more mainstream, wider stuff, there's like another conversation that goes on as well, because you think of, the Blumhouse comment about, he'd approached Jennifer Kent and she didn't want to make a Blumhouse film. And so there's this, because there aren't enough female directors, full stop, There are some female directors that are getting to make their films, but do they all want to make mainstream films? I think Chloe Zhao is doing, is it a Marvel film now? Which is, I just think, so cool and interesting off the back of The Rider, because that just didn't seem in any way like a Marvel film kind of director. But I'm just like, wow, that's going to be so refreshing to see somebody with those sort of instincts and tendencies to approach a sort of superhero franchise. But do all of us want to make big budget mainstream films? I think there are many women that do, but are they getting the opportunity to kind of break through as well? Or are the women that are getting the opportunity to break through more, I don't know, I don't want to use the word auteur, but like they want to write and direct certain types of films, and that's what the gatekeepers are allowing through in terms of women, because I've been in rooms where people have said, you don't make, your work doesn't look like a female director's work, and I'm like biting my lip going,
well, you're wrong.
What does a female director's work look like? It's like, because you're, because it is, but it's like, what does that mean? Does that mean we all should be doing like handheld floaty, texture stuff with people like touching fabric, and does it all need to look like a body form advert or something for it to be like, we can go out and make explode, like Catherine Bigelow, hello,
it makes me
these
wonder
women getting the opportunity is kind of,
it really makes me wonder how often that comment comes up for women in film rather than men in film as well, because I have often been told that my work didn't look like a female producer's work, and why was I interested in it? And I was like, does anybody ask Andy Stark that? Like, it's such a, where are your children? It's like, they don't exist. But it's that weird kind of balance again, isn't it? Where the expectation and the assumption is made because the world hasn't gotten to know what our voices are like yet. They've made assumptions about what our voices are like, to the extent that one of the most terrifying films about pregnancy was directed by a man. It's, so that's exciting that we can redefine what people think of when they think of a female made film, because they don't know what that means yet.
Because that's an extremely interesting point to bring up. It's the expectation. It's the expectation of what a female filmmaker might be interested in, and what specifically, if you do want to make a horror film or a genre film, what kind of horror will you be making? So can you talk a little bit about how do you think these expectations manifest, especially in the wake of, to Prana's point earlier, of kind of having quite a few successful, very female focused or female made horror films that are now being used as signposts? You've got Raw, got Revenge, you've got The Babadook, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. They're now creating, or have at least created to some degree, another set of expectations of what female horror filmmakers, quote unquote, should be doing or can do. So what do you think about kind of those expectations in the way that they're currently operating?
I've made a film about a serial killer pregnant woman, and I'm currently developing a film about menopausal witches. So I think I'm basically right there with the expectations of people for what female horror filmmakers would be making. I think other films I've done less so, but I think it's just obvious. It's just very obvious what people expect from women. And, as Prano said, it's a lot of times not at all what the female psyche is interested in. And it's exciting being able to redefine that. I've not seen Jennifer's film, and I'm very curious what kind of mood and tone and how far you go with it, because I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, my film's quite a sort of slow burn, very atmospheric, buildy. Essentially, it's a vampire film, but it's also very much based on a relationship between a husband and wife who are kind of living off grid in order to try and manage the condition that the wife has. So it's a lot about those kind of really nuanced relationship problems that come with either, well, we all know now, being isolated together, what that can do to a relationship, but also when someone has something really wrong with them that's, terminal essentially, and you having to manage someone else's eating habits and way of living in order to kind of carve out some sort of normal life. So I think anyone who's lived with someone who's had a terminal illness, or has had to be a carer in some way, or even someone who's dealt with a partner who has like an eating disorder, a lot of those kind of things are explored in the film.
So it's interesting then, between you and Prano, we've got maybe sort of a softer, more romantic, relationship driven story in horror, and then with you, Prano, that sort of more fierce, edgy, less female sort of perspective. And yet we're all women, so how does that work? Right? Who knew that we could be so different and varied? But
Nuts.
I mean, yeah, because Prano, you have a lot of strong background in feminist theory and that kind of stuff. So with your films, what do you feel about the female link there and the expectations of being a woman and that kind of thing?
Well, it's interesting because the majority of the characters in my shorts were men, the lead characters. I think they were all, oh no, there was the two first ones were female characters. And then the feature is a female character, and it's kind of, I suppose you could loosely call it a female like romance, but it's between two sisters and one of them isn't in the film. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I am a woman, so what I'm writing and making has to be sort of coming from a female point of view, but it's not something that I necessarily kind of feel is heavy-handed in my work, or that, I'm interested in horror and in making films for reasons other than being female, and I'm interested in making films because it gives me room to like explore ideas in ways that I can get into under the skin of them, and so my beginning point with my feature Censor was the video nasty era, which is all about, it's my fascination with horror and our relationship with horror, basically. The kind of early to mid 80s in Britain when VHS was like first created, and there's a boom in low budget horror videos that are going to apparently turn us all into murderers and rapists and poison our children's minds. I was like, wow, the psychology of this, the social hysteria, I just found it completely fascinating. And that was the kind of basis for my short film Nasty and for Censor. So that's not really got anything to do with being female. That's to do with, but you know, I've got a female character, and then you are exploring a woman in a certain type of world within that film. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that being female leads my work in terms of the ideas. Basically, it's kind of
it's interesting that the three of us come from such different places, but the same places, where initially my work was not female at all, and shamefully so, and now it's very much about the female experience. You've always been a horror filmmaker, storyteller, psychological storyteller, Prano, and Jennifer, you've done so many genres with your short films, but telling this story of psychological horror and that kind of realm, which might be considered more classically what expectations are for women. So we're doing it in three very different ways. You know, me literally doing it, Jennifer thematically doing it, and Prano not doing it at all, but obviously doing it because she's a woman still. So it's interesting between the three of us that it's sort of, I'm sure there's other ways, obviously, we're many and varied, us female filmmakers, but it's interesting to have such three different perspectives here, I think.
But I wanted to actually bring that all together, because with this newfound couple years old interest in the female perspective from genre and the set of expectations that it has created for filmmakers and within the industry, how do you think this has had a ripple effect on horror culture in general? You know, you've both mentioned, you've all mentioned festivals. How have you seen that come up in festival culture, both kind of more general festivals like LFF, more genre-specific festivals like Fright Fest, Fantastic Fest, and so on, and kind of with audiences? Prana, you mentioned kind of doing you know, panels and being featured in articles that kind of talk about this new female perspective on horror.
So I think that, I don't think audiences have changed. I think what they're used to is always changing. And so the first time they see something, just like the Saw movies or anything like that, the first time they see it, it's cringe. You watch Teeth, vagina dentata freaks you out. The next 10 times you see it, not so much. So I think because we've still got a lot of novelty to what stories we're telling, that we can be more engaging. But what I'm especially excited about is the way that the door opening for women and films by women has had a kind of roll-on effect to seeing a lot more queer cinema in the genre festival circuit. There's still not a lot of queer genre cinema. You still, you know, I think though, rather than getting maybe one a year on the festival circuit, now we're seeing sort of 3 or 4. And so to me, that's the biggest impact. This, you know, I think, like I said, this door opening for women, it's been a long journey. It's like Sisyphus with the boulder. We'll get there, but we're not done. But something I have seen recently is an acceptance of queer perspectives in a way that was really refreshing. And just going, you know, I was in a room where a film about a giant alien penis, like as in the alien is just like a giant penis, comes flying in to destroy the worlds, and it's a queer movie, and the room was like, yeah, giant penis, okay, great, got you, you know. And it was just like, it was so wonderful, because I genuinely think 10 years ago there are execs who would have walked out of that room. I don't think you've ever had people walk out of rooms, well, obviously you have, but not in the same way for female filmmakers and female pitches or female perspective. But I think the queer perspective has been, where people might have ignored the female perspective, they might have been repulsed by the queer perspective. And we're seeing that being way more accepted now as a result of the female voices coming in, I truly believe. Yeah, so that's my perspective on how it's changed things.
I think that I think what I've noticed that's changed is that people seem to be more accepting of like something not being one genre entirely, you know, and the kind of blend of genre and that's something that I'm really curious about in people seeing Rose, is like some people expecting a really, I mean, it's violent, but like someone expecting a jump scare horror might be disappointed by it. But then some people who have seen it were like really scared by it and like freaked out by stuff I didn't even intend to freak people out by. Like they're like, what's the thing with the water? And I'm like, the water? They're like, yeah, there's loads of water in the first 5 minutes. And I'm like, the water? I was like, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, the water, yeah. Nice. That was intentional. It's a metaphor for something. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I feel like to be even allowed to make a film that isn't just one thing, like it's a drama, sort of romance horror, it's like, what are people going to think about that? But it feels like a time to see.
Yeah, definitely. I love genre fusion, like when it's just not one thing. And I think audiences do too. That's why I like reading. But I think it comes back to the gatekeeper thing again, doesn't it? Because if you're like marketing a film, you know, how do you sell it if it's a bit of this and a bit of that? And is it going to land in this particular subgenre? And I know, like, I heard sort of the Babadook, when they created a trailer for the Babadook and sort of advertised it as like a monster film, a lot of like mainstream audiences were disappointed when they went in and watched a film about grief and mental health and motherhood, because, you know, it's being sold in a certain way, and that feeds back into the financing and development area of, like, if you're working within development with people who are going, it has to be this or this, you know, and it's great to work with people who have got some flexibility in that, who are basically open-minded about something being a little bit of a thriller and a little bit of a horror and a little bit of gore and a little bit psychological, and it doesn't just have to be one thing all the way through. But yeah, I'm interested in the same thing with my feature as well, so we'll have to report back once I've finished my film and people have seen it.
Thank you all so much for your amazing insight. Just to wrap up really this conversation, I wanted to ask you all, what new horror or what new voice in horror filmmaking are you most excited about?
I'm really excited to see Saint Maud. I haven't seen it yet. I've been seeing it for when it's kind of released, because I was shooting when it was at LFF and stuff last year. So yeah, I'm super excited to see Rose Glass's feature. And I hear she's the kind of new British voice in cinema. I read it somewhere in an article. So,
so it must be true.
So it must be true. Yeah, so I'm very excited about Rose and her film.
Yeah, same actually. Really excited to see it.
I'm rubbish. This is such an unfair answer. I'm excited. There's a writer, Karina Rodney, who is an older woman who has been writing some really interesting scripts, and her investigation into women in history and their diaries and their journals and this kind of thing. We're talking about women in the 1600s. That absolutely fascinates me. And she just had a Audible series about, or she's going to have an Audible series about these female pirates who were transvestites, like they dressed as men their whole lives, and it's a true story and it's absolutely astounding. And she's got a whole lot of other things in her back pocket. And so I'm excited to see how people respond to those and see what happens with that.
I just also wanted to say Ruth Paxton's just shot her first feature, The Banquet, and that's obviously going to be in post for a while, but I love Ruth's shorts, and so I'm excited to see that too.
I'm excited to see yours, Prano.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, absolutely.
So get it done, please.
Yeah, nearly there.
Good.
Thank you all so much. I'm here for the next panel being the female pirate renaissance, perhaps.
R.
Yeah.
Get it done.
It's rated R.
I'm really excited about people seeing and being able to see Censor and seeing Rose Love Story and seeing more of your work, Jen, as well. Thank you all so much for your time and for sharing your experiences and your insight and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.